So these are sort of topics that we're going to be discussing in our panel. I just kind of wanted to poll the audience to see, to make sure that we're along the same lines, we're on the same page of kind of where we are in industry. Where is the greatest potential value? I see asset management is number one. That's great. That's why we're all here today, to talk about the current state of industry, where we are and how to get to where we're going. So that being said, actually I think there's one more slide. Oh, it's here. Can't hear me? Where are the greatest investment costs? Software training seems to be number one. Research development, standards management, productivity disruption, customization. So I would say productivity disruption, just from my experience. When you're changing over from a 2D world to a 3D world, it's a long, hard learning curve. But that's just my perspective. What would be the most effective in pushing the AEC industry towards digitization? Owner-driven deliverables, number one. That's great. That means that we're all on the same page. Government mandate, we've been talking about this for 10, 11 years, and I don't think that's about to happen, but I think it could influence the industry. Return on investment, competitive advantage, and sustainability requirements. So that's it. That's just kind of an interesting poll on where we see ourselves. That being said, I'm going to invite the panelists up to their chairs, and we'll go through some short introductions before we dive in. I'm going to get the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, your company you're in, what kind of discipline you do, and how long you've been doing that.
My name is Chris Little. I work for Mott Niagara. I've been in there for, I think, 12 years now. I'm the Western BDC manager. Mott Niagara is a fairly large mechanical contractor in Canada. We have offices all across Ontario, Alberta, and BC. I've worked on about, 2.5 million square feet of hospital and whatnot, plus office towers. So a lot of trade background.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Teolis. I work for MacDonald, which is a global engineering management and development consultancy. We have offices around the world. In Canada, we have offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. I joined MacDonald last year, and before that, I was at Heathrow Airport. I've been working in the industry for about 15 years. Half that time in planning and modeling, and the second half of that time at Heathrow Airport in operations and maintenance.
Thank you. My name is Yuri Bartzis with Pomerleau. I'm an innovation director, director of operations for Canada. Pomerleau has offices all across Canada. We do general construction management, design, build on many different projects, and I've been leading our operations teams across Canada for the last 3 years at Pomerleau.
Hi everybody, David Thompson. I work for a company called Townsend. So they are a global cost and project and program management firm. So I've been with TNT for about 2.5 years now. Prior to that I was with a couple of contractors. You may have heard of PCL over in Canada. And then I worked for a company called Lang O'Rourke over in the Middle East and the UK.
And I'm Megan Brooks. I work for DIALOG, which is a multidiscipline design firm. We do everything from architectural and engineering services to urban planning and landscape. I'm the practice lead for our design technology team. We have lots of our design technology team here. We're trying to push the envelope and not be the architects that the GCs yell at all the time. And I've been there for about 3 years.
Great. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I was just thinking it's probably a bad idea on my side to put two Chris's on a panel because then it's going to cause some confusion. But anyway, I'm going to start this round off. The purpose of this discussion is really to get a good deep dive into where we are, current state in Canada in digital project delivery. It depends who you ask for, but I think we are all facing the same challenges. So really we'll define this, and this will sort of set the stage for the rest of the presentations of the day. Hopefully with the goal being that we define current state, we understand the challenges we're all facing, and the rest of the day will be, these are the steps we need to take or the things we need to think about to start driving the digital project delivery forward in industry, specifically for owners and asset management. So I'm going to start the panel off with a question for Mr. Teolis. Where do you think, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being 2D, 10 being complete digital twin, where do you think the state of BIM in Canada is, and why?
I think that there's pockets of probably in 8s and 9s. I think as an industry, we're probably 3 or 4, and I think we saw the survey results up there, and one of them being a push from government or a mandate from government. There's a number of countries around the world that have mandated BIM on all government projects. So we're not talking about industry-wide projects, but I think in those countries, what we've seen is snowballing of the industry. So really developing the capability as the industry needs to respond to those big government contracts. And I think that would be a good way to get us going. And I know you said, it's been a journey. We're not there yet, and it's not going to happen soon. But I think in the countries that you might be able to say it's at a 7 or an 8 as industry-wide, it's going to be those countries where there's a mandate.
Interesting. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Where is your experience on where we are?
Yeah. Well, I can add to that. I put us a little bit higher, but about a 5. I want to say kind of right in the middle. You're right. We do have players in the game that are up in the 8s and 9s, but when you said 0 is a 2D, if we're working in 2D, and we still have subtrades that are working in 2D. So just looking at that big spectrum of all the different stakeholders across our project, we're kind of, in my opinion, we're right in the middle. We do need to work with the ones that are below that 5, but we do have some strong players above.
Yeah, I would happen to agree. If I think of 5 as being like a robust set of information requirements and collaborative working through all parties as an industry, I would be leaning towards the 4.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think we're there yet as an industry. We've got the framework in place, we're just not utilising it and adapting it yet.
Okay. Something to add? Okay.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I think we're at about a 5. I'd say we have those building blocks kind of moving forward and trying to push it. Coming from our perspective, we have people who are requesting digital twins. They want digital twins. We'll go through the process to implement it and try and write it into our contract. Then as soon as they find out they have to hire somebody to maintain this or create a new job or invest money into it, they just pull the trigger and they go back to their old contractual requirements.
Understood. Chris, do you have anything to add or no? I think it's good, yeah. I would agree too. Myself, just I think part of the problem is these pockets. They can't do anything out with the rest of the stakeholders. You can't do it all yourself, right? As GCs, we're at PCL, we're very sophisticated, but we're at the mercy of the consultants, the trades, the architects, and more importantly, the owner contracts and what they're asking for. So we see momentum, but yeah, we are definitely laggards on the world stage, I would say. So that being said, my next question here is, I'm just going to throw it out to the first person who want to answer it, is what is the biggest barrier to BIM on your projects, or DPD?
All right.
Yeah.
I find that recently one of the biggest barriers as a mechanical trade is mechanical skill set and personnel. There's a lot of training that is required on our side, both the MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. There's a lot of training, and the education systems and the industry as a whole hasn't really come up with a solution to that training until the models get, in my opinion, good on enough projects. This is always going to be a tough thing to sort of pull off in terms of accuracy. Installation and so on and so forth. The industry is fairly new and underserviced with skill sets.
I'll add. I think going back to the survey, I love the survey, by the way. I think the owners aren't asking for it. They're not demanding it enough. And I think once that happens, we'll see a big step change.
The one aspect that I wanted to add to that question from a GC perspective is reliability on the information that we receive throughout the process. I think if we had more reliability to that information, if we are assured that there are no assumptions being made or details that are missed out because of lack of money or lack of time, then we could be assured that the rest of the project is going to run smoothly. So it's reliability of that information that comes to us would be great.
So for me, it's a couple of things. I agree with the fact that most of the companies are actually using BIM software. They're actually modeling themselves because they see internal benefits out of it, but they're not sharing it. And they're not sharing it because there's no requirements. There's no driving from the top. So it's all coming down from the client, or lack of at the moment. But we are finding that people are using models. They're just using it internally. So it's just siloed BIM. And it's funny what you said there about the mechanical contractors. When I was working over in Manitoba, we were actually finding that the M&E contractors were actually driving a lot of the process because they were prefabricating from the model. They just weren't getting the reliability of the models coming downstream, so they were struggling. So two factors there.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to add real quick to there. I think I agree 100%. Just on Yuri's comment about reliable information, I think that's a side effect of not having collaborative processes. You can't rely on the information because it's done in a silo and handed off and it's full of assumptions. You can't make sure there's no assumptions there if you're not talking to the people that actually are using that information. So I think, yeah, absolutely big problem. We have to change how people talk to each other. Absolutely. Chris?
Can I do an ad?
Sure.
A second addition to that would be I find that there's a misconception on. I believe that construction in terms of its design to the end date of a project being handed over is iterative in nature. There's so many. I've realized there was a big aha moment I had personally this year where I was talking to a consultant, professional engineer. And they said something where our drawings by our professional organizations should not be accurate because there's legalities around it that are issued to them at the APEGA PEO level where they don't want to have perfect because perfect implies a bunch of legal ownership that is sort of counter to the survival of a consultancy business. So with that fact as a statement, we have to realize that there's a continuum of thought and design that ends up with the end of the day building that's getting handed over to someone. And I find that if our industry accepted a little bit more that there was an iterative, here's my idea. Oh, that's a good idea. Let me, sculpt it a little bit. Oh, and then it goes up the chain with a number, like dozens or hundreds of stakeholders on any one project. The acceptance of that iterative design, which is what I'm saying is sort of what IPD is. That would be I would see one of the biggest sticking points that I see internally in our company and externally with our clients and our collaborators like our general contractors and whatnot.
No, good point for sure. So this leads kind of a good segue into the next question is, I have a bunch of very technically savvy companies on the stage here. I want to know what was the biggest change you've seen in your offices and your workflows since adopting a digital process or I guess changing your processes into digital. Anybody want to? I can pick on somebody.
Well, we've already talked about it, and it's the ability to collaborate, whether it's internally or externally with all the stakeholders on the project. That ability to collaborate using your 3D, which is your visual, but the information that's inside those 3D models, which is the eye and BIM, you have a lot of abilities there to share information, to keep people involved. You don't have supers on site that have ideas in their heads and not able to communicate that to the rest of the project teams or some of the sub-trades. So the key within Pomerleau is that ability to communicate effectively internally and externally, and that's what we have found by switching into that digital project delivery.
So I think if I start with talking about when I was with the contractors, just the discussions and the attitude started changing over time. At the beginning, there was a lot of resistance. You know, everybody still wanted to use a scale ruler when they were doing the markups and the takeoffs. And there was resistance to change. I think everybody can probably resonate with that. There was resistance to change. They thought that it was going to be an addition to their daily job. They thought that they were going to have to learn something fundamentally new. And they thought that, why, what's in it for me, I guess, the whole what's in it for me. But as we started sitting down and working through with like the individuals, and they started to say, well, actually, this can help me, not just the project and the client, but it can actually help me, focus on what I'm best at. Not doing onerous manual work when the software can actually do it for you. And then you're getting that reliable information coming in for you to use. So the discussions started changing. The attitude started changing. We started getting from when they would see you in the hallway, they'd run away, to they were actually coming and knocking on your door and asking for, can you just dive into the model? Can you show me how to use the model? So the attitudes and the discussions definitely started changing. And that just started kind of filtering through to when the projects were starting off. The discussions would be getting brought to the table a little bit earlier on. So unfortunately, there were only discussions the majority of the time, and then everybody was kind of defaulting. When I think about my current role with as essentially a client's representative, we rely on the project information. We don't actually create the information ourselves. So, my team doesn't model. They'll use the model for assurance and the management and the audit and so on. So because we don't get that good quality information coming through all of the time, it can cause frustration. You can only work with what you've got. So, but again, the discussions have started changing. We've started moving this mindset from this traditional, 100-year-old mindset to working with softwares and just trying to embrace it. So we've got a very strong presence over in the UK. We're a UK company, so we have a very established team over in the UK who've been doing it longer than us. So we've been utilising their kind of experience and expertise and trying to get that kind of cascaded across into the different regions. So that is helping, but it's still that information that we're kind of relying on coming from the industry. Long-winded answer there. Sorry.
It's all good.
I agree with what these guys say as well. We're seeing it in our industry, like from DIALOG specifically, that technology is now driving the industry. So we went from that transition from AutoCAD to Revit, thinking that Revit was BIM, but we're still using it as a 2D element. We're now seeing that our project teams are understanding the value of the information to input into the models. So kind of under the premise of let's design with the end in mind. Let's design to help the facility team. Let's design to get that information back from the feedback loop so that we can make more informed design decisions and improve our processes internally. I would say that's probably the biggest difference that we've seen is just the cultural shift in the digital transformation and the mindsets that project teams now have.
Excellent. Hold on to that, Mike. So that being said, what are your biggest challenges on using your office since adopting BIM? And that's a general term, I understand, but it has been. I started my career in the architectural world when 2003, just when BIM was started to be that buzzword. So I'm curious. There are challenges of moving over into a different workflow. What are those?
I think there's definitely the educational component. Most people think when we have our moving from CAD to Revit, it's going to improve time. It's going to be easier to do our designs when in reality, we're still providing 2D documents. We're still contractually obligated. So we're not actually utilizing the platform to its fullest extent. That could provide value, I think, to all stakeholders. With that, we now see shorter time, less fees to actually do our work in. So to actually get that quality information to hand to the subtrades with the reliability of what we provide is, I think, a bit lower because we're not able to provide that information to everybody.
So just on a touch on that, so if I understand correctly, the switch to BIM has sort of constrained your workflows based on the assumption that it's more efficient, but it's not more efficient. So it's a kind of an outside influence on your workflows?
Absolutely. I think they and this is just my opinion, I think the assumption is that because we're using BIM, because we're using Revit, it has that information component, that we're able to output things at a quicker pace. And by all means, I think the capability is there, but we're not utilizing it. So from things like how we have generative design, if we can use computational design to provide some of this value for the owners, we definitely are trying to utilize it, but the assumption is that it can happen in real time. Even for things such as visualizations from a design perspective, that's huge in storytelling when we look at our architecture, but real-time rendering used to be something that clients paid for. We're going to pay you copious amounts of money to make a pretty picture. Now the assumption is that, oh, you can change this right in front of us right now, and we're going to continue to see this visualization. So that's an added service that isn't something we typically would provide normally.
Interesting.
For this question, I think I answered it partly in the last one. For us, it's again the reliability of the information. You know, the getting the models through to actually be able to utilize and carry out our cost and management services. But also the fact that, you know, we kind of sit alongside the client. So we are sitting between the supply chain and the client, acting as that client's rep. And because the client's not, you know, engaged all of the time, we are essentially trying to take that, you know, take those discussions through the supply chain, through the engineers and the architects, and everybody pretty much is on board. You know, they get the benefits out of this, but there's still that gap between what the client understands or wants or is prepared to embrace on the project and what the teams can actually do. So that's that's probably the biggest challenge that we're seeing.
Ambiguous deliverables.
You said it.
I would split the answer to two questions. There's the internal challenges and the external challenges. External challenges would be contract commonality. I feel like the industry as a whole is not yet sorted out their contract language in a clear and agreed upon manner. Subset of all of that would be like, what's your database for filling out the CMMS, the client management system on the facility management side at the end of the day? That changes widely from project to project to project, and for good reason. So that's a thing. Internally, one of our biggest challenges is I didn't answer the first question, which was like, what's the biggest change? I think the biggest change is an acceptance that I see within a mechanical space, is that there's now a high level of enthusiasm combined with a high degree of some semblance of contractual obligation. So that leads back to an earlier thing, like finding staff. We're now drinking from a fire hose. Before it was like dribs and drabs, enthusiastic singular projects. Now it's like it's hitting in the last 12 months, I'd say, you know, contracted requirements have probably increased 300 to 400%. So skill sets again. And then the other thing is, with all of those things I've just mentioned, it's gotten a lot realer. And within Modern Niagara, we've had the necessity to go back and check a lot of our databases and standards and all that stuff to find out that like this is an example. We're doing an audit of all of our mechanical piece databases, everything, like millions and millions of parts, because we have to find all of the errors, because now it's being wanted so much that if we find a fitting that's the wrong way, it can mean that like pipes don't get installed the way that it was intended. Now we're bonking into a whole bunch of other stuff that's bad news. So I would say that the challenge is adhering to what I would call a real business event. It's not an R&D effort anymore. It's across our whole industry, and how do you keep up with the demand of that? So,
no, it makes sense. Absolutely. That's a great segue into the next question. Do you think current standards are working in the industry, i.e. LOD, IFC, ISO 19650, anything? I guess the most common ones would be things like LOD. Is that working in the way it's supposed to work for our digital projects?
I'm really well versed in the BIM forum specifications. The ISO one caught me off guard. I hadn't read that. I would say that there's a misunderstanding with, I don't know if a lot of people actually read how those things get written. there's huge variabilities that can be put next to any LOD, for instance. And when you're filling out a contract, you're supposed to fill out the variability. But usually, like I would say 95% of the time, I just see do 300 LOD. Wait a second. It says in the BIM form document you're supposed to fill out a lot more clarity with respect to that statement. And that again, 95% of what we've seen doesn't happen. So there's the specifications they sort of work, but the industry isn't doing their job and fine-tuning the stuff that they need around it. I'm speaking specifically towards geometric accuracy. But in short, no, I don't think our standards are up to snuff. I think that there's huge debate, and we as an industry could do a lot of work there. I think we should be loosening some of our tolerances as a sub-trade, but not too much.
And I can talk maybe to the ISO 19650 standard, because that's the one that I'm most familiar with. And I think that it does do a good job. I think that it's there and it represents sort of best practice. I think that there's a ways for us to go, and I think that we're not going to get ISO 19650 compliant on projects tomorrow. So I think that there's a gap between that standard in place and where we are, and I think we should be okay with maybe the lower tolerance, like not necessarily striving for perfection right away, but just using the principles that are there, and kind of like the spirit of it, and start there and then move forward.
So to add to both of those statements, so ISO 19650 I think is a great standard. I think that's a standard that, like you said, brings best practices to the table, and that more stakeholders can use that document to better their process, but the process for their project teams. Going back to LOD, I think LOD is a great way to identify the detail that's going into a model, but it's one small piece to a bigger process, which is using digital project delivery to construct successfully. So LOD without going into the detail of all the different elements, or LOD without talking about LOI, which is your level of information into those different construction elements, we need more of a standard way of working, or a standard process that uses the concept of LOD. So I think that, yeah, LOD just needs a little bit more structure around it for it to be successful, but it's not right now.
Yeah, I agree with what these guys said. I think it's important to recognise that we're in a transition. So I was fortunate enough to work back in the UK with the PAS 1192 suite of documents. So were they perfect? No, I think everybody recognised that they weren't perfect, but they provided a framework to be able to work to the principles of BIM Level 2 over in the UK. The ISO has kind of been introduced over the last couple of years in Canada, but I don't think there's been enough education around how it's actually used and what it means, and the fact that it is a framework. It's a framework. You know, I don't think it's supposed to be, you know, set in stone, rigid. You must comply to this. So there are clients who we're speaking to at the moment where it doesn't work. Their programs are too large for the ISO to work as it stands. So they need to adapt rather than adopt, which is fine as long as it's consistently applied and it's agreed by everybody and it works. As for the LOD, we've had a number of discussions on LOD over the last couple of years. LOIN, so level of information need, is the new kind of term. They've recognised that, you know, LOD isn't perfect. It's hard to track. It's hard to identify, you know, what is an LOD 300 as opposed to a 350. So LOIN was introduced. The problem is LOIN there's been no metrics put to LOIN. So they've said, this is LOIN, this is what you need to use now because LOD fundamentally isn't kind of working as it should, but nobody knows how to put it into practice. So it's kind of a chasing game. So the guys who have actually developed it are letting you figure out what LOIN actually means and how to apply it to your project. So we've been having a number of discussions across the globe as to how LOIN is consistently delivered across the projects. So LOD wasn't perfect, but at least it gave you a metric and a frame of reference to work from when putting your requirements in place.
Awesome. I get asked on the daily, what is our standard for LOD for DIALOG? And I give them the exact same answer. It's 300 to 350. That's what we provide. But I don't think there's an inherent understanding of what LOD actually means in the modeling. We say 300 to 350. It's a gray area. We provide that for some elements, not for everything. Like Chris mentioned, we have to lay out a framework. What elements do we actually need to provide, and what level of information do we need to provide? I think there needs to be that balance between the two so that we can actually build that value in the models themselves.
Okay, very good. I'm just going to add a little bit to that. For those who know me, understand my feelings about LOD. I explain it like this. I think LOD is a push system. If you're familiar with lean construction, you're trying to define what the value is for the next person in the value chain without talking to them. So you're making assumptions and then passing it off and calling it something that, assuming that the next person can use it for what you're designing it for. But in reality, everything changes. It's not what we want. This piece of equipment isn't anything. It's generic. It's right. And I think by the time we have that pass off, it all goes out the window anyway, because we have to, we're filling in all those blanks. So, like I say, I explain it as a push system. Instead of asking what you want from the next person in the value chain, you're trying to just jam it on them and get them to add more development, but really you're taking 2 steps back and redoing a lot of stuff because it's all based on assumptions. So, I personally think it's a tool we use to help define scope, but in the fundamentals of how it's supposed to work, we've lost that a long time ago. And in a world of 2D deliverables, of drawing deliverables, it's sort of pointless in my mind, because it doesn't define. You're trying to define model deliverables, and we're attaching it to percentage complete of design, and it's not supposed to be work that way. So, anyway, I will leave it there, but. I think we've heard from the panel that it's not perfect, but it's what we have, so it's good. Last question here before we open it up to the audience. I'm gonna direct this towards Yuri. Do you see confusion in roles and responsibilities in the project lifecycle, and what kind?
Yeah, thanks for directing that to me. Chris, you touched on that already in terms of roles and responsibilities when you mentioned the legal responsibilities that our engineers and architects have in the entire construction process. And looking at that and then linking it with LOD, if you're asking an engineer to take a construction drawing set issued for construction at LOD 350, well, what are you really asking the engineer to do? And then to stamp that, of course, which is that seal. Right, so the legal responsibility for an engineer to stamp that drawing and to certify it, I think and again, you mentioned it, it's only engineering design intent that's supposed to be on that drawing. So you're missing a lot of information, a lot of detail that isn't captured by design intent. Design intent is quite simple. You have certain design parameters. You don't have equipment parameters that are specific to what you're actually going to build. So the design intent is really only, if you want to reference it to LOD, it's like LOD 200 at best.
It's an iteration. It's a step along the way.
It's a step along the way, which I know you guys can't hear him because of the microphone. So exactly. So let's take a step back from the legal process. The BIM process requires all the different stakeholders to contribute to a model or to the process at the time where they're going to bring the most value. So if you're asking an engineer to provide 350, you're already too late because you probably should have already asked the trade partner to provide his input back at 200. So I think that the responsibility in that discussion about role and responsibility throughout the entire BIM process needs to be reviewed. I think that responsibility can be taken away from engineers who feel strongly that they are putting their stamp and seal, and that's not done lightly onto some projects. But the projects that I've seen that are very successful are the ones where you get early input from general contractors, from trade partners, Constructability is put right into that issued for construction drawing. Same thing with installation method. It's already been thought out and materials have already been clarified. There's no assumptions. You can rely on the data that comes before it. And I think that trades and even GCs are ready to take a little bit more of that responsibility as well. So again, thank you for addressing that question to me.
You were prepared. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, fully agree with what you just said. Just to add to that, I think the terminology as well. If you think about the PAS and the ISO kind of roles and responsibilities for task teams and everybody that's involved in this collaborative BIM process. I think the process isn't always clear. So people don't necessarily know what they need to be delivering when and to who. So it gets muddled up a little bit with the actual roles and responsibilities, but also the terminology. The terminology is something that's always become like a barrier in discussions wherever I've been and had conversations about how the process is supposed to be set up. So and the terminology changes from even region to region over here in Canada. It's not even just kind of countrywide. It's province-wide where I've seen kind of difference in terminology with who should be doing what. So it does need to be more clearly defined. Who should be doing what, when, and how. So, yeah.
And I think, like we've said it, BIM is enabling collaboration, which is where we're kind of breaking down in our current processes. I think we're still working in our silos. We have our design model. We give you the design intent model. You create a model for construction. You recreate a model for subtrades. There's a lot of wasted time in our modeling methods for one project, we'll say. I think there could be like collaborative efforts and really defining what that looks like. We bring the subtrades on, they help us. Their responsibility is to do their trade. Maybe the engineers can provide value. They're still going to be stamping drawings, but they wouldn't necessarily be doing the means and method part of the modeling. I know I've had this conversation with many general contractors, and they say, why can't you make our models to constructability? But we don't have that knowledge. We don't have that skill set. We don't have boots on the ground every day. So there is a little bit of communication I think we need to have in terms of how we do our modeling and work with the subtrades and general contractors.
Has to be a lot of communication.
Yes. Sorry, a lot of communication.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add to that?
Roles and responsibilities. The role of an engineer, Yuri said it, was design intent. When I look at, I like to judge things by failures and just don't go there. So forget BIM, forget this IPD stuff, or project delivery, digital project delivery. Let's think back like 30 years ago. The constructors that were successful got the job done when the building was due. Because behind all of this is a massive mortgage payment that has to be met. And if you delay a project like an office tower that costs $600 million of today's money, and you delay it by 5 months because you're late, the mortgage payment is what really blows everything up. 30 years ago, the tradespeoples and the architectural and GC firms that were able to not do that thing, that 5 month late thing, there were people decision-making at the end of the line by the tradespeople and the GCs being like, oh, I see the intent, I'm going to do this, otherwise I'm going to play with that end date schedule. And to me, that's what success looked like. Because again and again and again, those GCs delivered what they owed, which is the non-terrible mortgage payment of a late project. Like that's where these, like, to me, success should be first judged. And if we understand that, we have to pull all of that like final and quick and acceptance of I'm making a decision that may be influenced or slightly counter to a design intent, but I'm doing it because I want to finish this job as fast as we can, like on time. That is said. I find that like if we, to the point of collaboration, we have this tool now that lets us modify and graduate a design to a higher level of detail with sooner than it otherwise would have been 30 years ago. And we've got these histories of like we have deadlines of 75% DD is due here, and what does that mean? And I don't ever want to draw anything ever again as a consultant. And the owner's already agreed to a bunch of stuff that's on 75% DD. But wait a second, there's inherent flaws in there. And as a trade and the GCs, we if we have to move or nudge anything after 75%, we've messed with someone's intent. The system of roles and responsibilities is really counterproductive and full of conflict because we're owning all of these decisions, which if you act like we've all agreed, I think this is like, you know what I mean? It's iterative and there needs to be communication and collaboration. Those things aren't done in the first quarter or half of a project. It's an evolution. And if we leaned back and looked at the roles of responsibility, the role of the trade is like, we better get it done before deadline. The role of the trade and the GC is we better give good facility management data because that's what the owner also wants. But the owner wants the project done on time, I think. And the role of the designer is to provide design intent, hopefully in the first quarter or third of the project, so that someone can look at something and give some kind of commentary. Like it's these kinds of like we're too regimented, I think, in our roles and responsibilities, and we're not accepting of the fact that there's communication that needs to happen. And every project in the world is imperfect. It's imperfect to take design intent to completion. Here are your keys. Good day. So there. Did that make sense?
I can add one on.
Sure.
So I think one more would be the owner and what's the owner's role and responsibility. And I think often the owner tends to take a back seat and just say, here it is, you deliver it for me. I think that the owner does have a role and a responsibility to step into that project, to put in, some of their operational teams, get them embedded into the project so that knowledge exists in the project team. And also, highlighting some of the outcomes, the requirements. There's a big role for the owner. And I'd like to see the owners kind of step up and take on more responsibility in the projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I'm just trying to find the... there we go. What would be the most effective in pushing the AEC industry towards digitization? Owner-driven deliverables is number one, and on owner-driven deliverables, they need to be involved in making sure they're getting what they're getting the right people involved to make the right decisions at the right point in time. So I agree with you 100%. I'm going to open it up to the audience I think we have some time left for a couple of questions, if there's anything out there burning on your mind. David. Good to see you. Sure. Jerry, you got a mic for David? Or? Well,
we can one question. Can you go back to the standards, that slide with the spider graph of the standards? So I actually have wow. I'll whisper. So I feel like the industry is focused too much on standards with this, right? And, like the LOD and COBE and all that. So BIM form, for instance, right? I'm very familiar with the BIM form LOD. They come right out and they say, think of the BIM form LOD as the equivalent of a dictionary, right? We're not going to tell you how to write a story. We're not telling you what type of story to write, but here's how to use the words and assemble them, right? I feel like too many owners are not telling teams how to write stories. They're just giving them a dictionary and say, okay, go write me a story without any definition around it. So I guess the question that I have is, when you guys on the panel here have owners that are asking for digital project delivery, how many of them are going beyond, give me COBE or give me LOD, whatever, and are actually saying, hey, look, this is a defined data structure that I need. This is the reason I have this data structure, because I need to take it into this CAFM system, or I'm using it for this type of facility management platform. These are the actual assets, or these are what I consider an asset. There's tens of thousands of things that go into a building. These are the 100 of them that are an actual asset that I care about. And this is the information about those assets. And oh, by the way, now we can talk about industry standards as far as what type of classification system am I going to use. Is it OmniClass? Is it Uniformat? How many owners are providing that level of detail that is really, you know, the what you need to, as the starting point for digital project delivery? Because without all of that, from where I sit, this is just, it's here's a dictionary, go write me a story.
1%.
Less.
Yeah, or less.
One
But
owner.
about 15 to 20% would hand the dictionary definition. Here's a dictionary. Give me words. So 20% are talking, are at least aware of the dictionary. 1% are doing what you're saying, like, you know, hitting that high level, and the rest it's a zero or unknown. The dictionary is sort of upside down and torn in half. The contract variance is wild.
And I want to follow up real quick because I think some of you know who I am, who I work for, and where I'm coming from with this. Is this relevant to you guys? Is this something that, what I just said is what I think an owner should be asking. Is this what you think they should be giving you?
Yes, 100%. And I think we addressed that in one of the responses where we need those owners to provide the deliverables and clear deliverables with the detail that you mentioned in your statement, 100%. I think a good example of that, and we talked about the issues in Canada and the different provinces having their own mandates, and it's hard to have standards across federal. If you look at, and I'm talking about government because I see them as a huge owner, think about all the different provinces that have a clear BIM implementation roadmap. I know the Quebec government has put in a clear BIM implementation roadmap, but I haven't seen it from many of the others. It falls down to the municipality level. I think there's a few municipalities that are quite ahead and starting to put that in their standards and to ask that on their projects. Obviously, hospitals and campuses are closely behind, or not behind, but very, very much ahead in providing those details. But when it comes to public, private, we're not seeing owners that have that knowledge, and I'd love to see more of that.
It's a challenge that we have on a regular basis, to be honest. I think it's just because they don't know what they want. They don't know what they want. Forget how to get there. They just don't know what they want. So we're doing regular kind of touch bases, knowledge shares with clients. But a large part of it comes down to risk for the clients as well. So they think, okay, so if we're going to use BIM to alleviate risk or manage risk, well, isn't that just the contractor's responsibility? They're taking the risk on board. So why do I care? Again, what's in it for me? So where we're trying to wave the flag with a lot of the government organisations, where they're actually saying, look, we've got a five-year plan ahead of us, where we want to get to digitally enabled operational data. So okay, and so can we take kind of your good work that you're doing, and then can we start sharing that amongst a lot of the other clients? Letting them know what you do. Again, a lot of the success around the world has come from the federal push down from the top, whereas we're trying to kind of fight the good fight from that kind of midsection, and then we've got a lot of the kind of large organisations that kind of just aren't looking at it yet. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But we do have that challenge on a daily basis, with just trying to get the client to understand exactly how they can benefit from it, because inevitably they can benefit from this. It's just, again, it's overwhelming for them as well. So I recently got told that one client didn't really want to look at any of this. They were interested, they could see the value, but because they were to such a tight budget, they didn't want to look at the digital O&Ms, and they didn't want to look at operating the building digitally because they were pushed for money. I've still yet to have that discussion with them afterwards, once we found out what the comment was. But it was just such an interesting perspective from one of the clients that we were talking to. So, and I think again it just comes down to lack of education and awareness. So we need to get better at educating the clients around the country.
You should have talked to that client about the actual cost of the building life cycle and seen where they want to spend the money. Right.
Dan, before we go further, we have a question from the audience, but it'll be the last question.
My question is, through the discussion of the panel, there's been a lot of discussion about BIM and modeling and the process, lack of standards. But kind of zooming out on that lens a bit, talking about the digitization of the entire project, the BIM model contains some information. It's one source of information. But there's a lot of other sources of information that contain other information, like the shop drawing process, the commissioning reporting process. I'm wondering how the digitization applies to those additional processes as well, if the information is being put back into the model or if this is being addressed separately, and how it ties into that larger project and that larger picture.
I can answer some of it. I think in terms of the digitization, it kind of comes back to those roles and responsibilities. We provide a record model, GCs provide their as-built model. Who's going to embed that information? I think that's a constant fight that we're having with many of our GCs to understand who's going to input the information. I think we're still living in those data silos where we aren't sharing that information across. We lose information every time we do a different process. I think that's something that needs to be more refined in terms of standardization and those iterations for an actual workflow that is going to be sufficient to hand over to the client or the owner in the end.
Yeah, just agree 100%. I think also we're trying to shoehorn something into an old process and an old methodology. I think we need to accept that fundamentally the procurement process and contracts and fee structure all needs to change to work with like a BIM enabled process. And as long as we are still using the traditional contracts and procurement methods, that those challenges aren't going to go away. They're going to remain. Other countries have actually changed their base contracts to incorporate BIM methodologies in. We haven't done that yet, so we are still seeing those current issues that you've just discussed there.
I want to just add to that a little bit. I think I would challenge that a little bit. I think that's up to the owner to define what they want. I mean, we're talking a lot about ambiguous deliverables, and a lot of the assumption in the industry is we have data and geometry, and amongst all the other stakeholders, eventually we want to amalgamate all that data and geometry into a nice shiny asset management model or whatever you want to call it. But in reality, there is a lot of disconnected information, a lot of this stuff, and if the client wants it in a certain format, there's costs associated. There's common data environments, there's certain software, there's databases, there's things that need to be put into the contracts. So I don't think it's up to the stakeholders, GC, trades, engineers to figure all that out. I think that's up to the owners to define exactly what they need, in what format they need, in what system they need, and then pass it off to the rest of the stakeholders to figure that out. I would bet that once that exercise has been followed and the actual defining, you're going to realize that you don't want all that information in a model. You're going to want it in your CMMS, and that model is for reference for other things, right? I think we spend a lot of time and effort in industry trying to make that happen based on the assumption that that's actually usable and valuable for owners, and I don't think that's the case, but that's just my perspective. Having to clarify, I see Chris's face kind of. Just to, I don't think we have an as-built model with all the data in it that hands it over for an owner to use for facilities management. I don't think it works like that, and I think that's one of the assumptions in the industry that, that's sort of the gold standard of what we're trying to get to. But I think as we go through the rest of the day, we're going to understand that it doesn't look like that. But
Dan, we have a question from the online audience. Cry Bachman asks, do you think a government mandate of BIM/DPD in brackets using ISO 19650 as a framework will help spur on the private sector to innovate?
I think that's a Chris Teolis question.
Can do, yeah. I think it's a no-brainer. I think when you put in a mandate, you are forcing the industry to respond to that mandate. The UK, for example, gave the industry 5 years, I think, to up their game and respond to the new standard that's coming in. And since then, innovation has followed I don't think there's a question in my mind about that. Anybody else?
I think you hit it on the nail, that we've seen it happen in other parts of the world. So yes, I think that is the answer is obvious. Although how to make that happen in Canada, where we are so vast and we have so much diversity from province to province, that's a big challenge.
There's always a big conflict. The federal government, provincial government, nobody wants to take the lead for that. But
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. Absolutely. I think a federal mandate, or at least a government mandate, would definitely give the drivers for everybody to jump onto this and start collaborating more.
yeah, great. Something to add?
I agree.
Okay, good. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much.